Well, welcome back to the Cordell Cordell and Men's Divorce Video and Podcast. I'm Scott Trout, CEO and Managing Partner of Cordell Cordell. We continue to bring you information regarding family law as it particularly relates to, and I guess ancillary to COVID-19 as we continue to roll out of it in week 15. Since really the beginning in most of the states around the country, trying to identify spot issues that affect guys, not just in family law, but particularly in COVID-19. And today is really no different. We're going to talk a little bit about paternity. Not necessarily that it has an impact on COVID-19, obviously custody does, but this is one of the areas that we really haven't talked a lot about. And we've really just touched the surface a number of weeks ago during our virtual town hall on paternity issues. And we see it quite a bit here at Cordell Cordell. And so we thought it would be good. We're joined once again by Rex in our Indianapolis office. Welcome.
Thanks, Scott. Yep, as you said, Rex Padgett here in Indianapolis. I've been with Cordell here for about just over 3 years. My anniversary was just about a week and a half ago, and been practicing for about 7 years. And absolutely, this is a topic I think we haven't discussed or heard on the podcast, town halls, et cetera. However, as we've been cooped up with another party for quite a while during quarantine, et cetera, we may be seeing some of this coming down the road.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think I expect it fully. And, I get questions on paternity a lot. I think it's a really touchy subject because there's some really misunderstanding out there about the law, about the rights of guys. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But obviously, they always give the warning that this shouldn't be taken as legal advice. It's, I'm only licensed in Missouri, Illinois, and Georgia, and Rex, I know, in Indiana. And, we have a lot of people from around not only the country, but the world watching, especially since we have our office in the UK. And so we encourage you to seek out a consult with your attorney if you have specific questions about your particular case. That, certainly we can't provide you those answers today during this video. And we just want to guide you and create speaking and talking points with your attorney. If you don't have an attorney, you can seek us out. Obviously, we're available anywhere around the country, and particularly in Indiana. You can schedule a consult by calling 866-DADS-LAW, or you can seek us on the web at cordellcordell.com. And as you know, we're always available for a consult, either virtually, telephone, or in person where appropriate, and we're allowed, depending upon the state guidelines during this COVID-19. So let's just dive right into it, Rex. But first, and a number of weeks ago, you and I talked, and we wanted to get an update on the court system and what's really changed over the last several weeks in Indiana. We have this up and down nature of COVID-19 around the country, and guys now, want to know, is something opening, shutting? What's happening in Indiana with the court system?
Yeah, Scott. So we are seeing, several of the courts starting to open up a little bit more. However, with the same breath, there's been some delays because of the backlog. So in-person hearings are getting scheduled out. I was just I had a Zoom hearing last week, and the judge was trying to set that for a half a day setting for a contested issue. And she said her calendar right then was November. And so,
oh my gosh.
So you're looking at some extended periods of time. That's here in Marion County. So they are trying to adopt or adapt to that a little bit. And so they've actually brought in some senior judges, which are retired judges who have agreed to, take on cases here and there. And so they ask the attorneys and the parties if they'd be willing to have somebody else hear the matter, because they could probably get us in sooner. And so we were able to accommodate that and got a setting towards the end of July. So although, some of the courts are getting backlogged, they are making some accommodations, if you will, to help get us in the court and get their day in court, if you will. Others, again, we've talked about this before, but the judges are liking the remote hearings, and so several have pushed out orders and issues saying, if the matters can be heard remotely, we're going to continue that. Especially as we see different stuff throughout. Indiana hasn't seen spikes. We're kind of trending downward, which is a positive thing. But as you know and see on the news, Florida, Texas, Arizona, California have seemed to hit some spikes and actually increase. And maybe they're not taking the precautions or they're just seeing more cases, unfortunately. Maybe more testing as well. So that's a positive thing. But Indiana's definitely taken some precautions, trying to ease into things.
And I think it just calls for maybe some creative thinking and strategy, as you suggest, trying to find ways to get things moved up. And rather than November, and here in Missouri, we're probably talking next year in 2021. We're still in a really slow phased opening. We're only in really phase one in some of our local courts. So it really encourages guys to go online, I think you and I talked about this, locate things on the web, find out status of the court system, meet with an attorney, try to think of creative ways to move your case along. And I think that's really the answer. So
Yeah, there's more than one way to skin the cat, if you will.
exactly. Yeah. The end is not just, oh, courts are closed so that we do nothing. I mean, I think that the answer, you and I have talked about this. Let's, meet with an attorney and figure out a way to get things going.
Exactly.
So paternity, that it's a big, it's a big legal word, father-child relationship, unmarried parents perhaps, or married parents. We'll talk a little bit about that don't know whether or not their child is theirs, but maybe identify, one thing, and that is typically we think of unmarried parents who have a child. And so the question for guys really is, how do they establish that relationship legally? Meaning that many guys come in and say, well, my name's on the birth certificate. Isn't that enough? Is it enough, Rex, just to be on the birth certificate?
Yeah, Indiana says no, that is not enough to be on the birth certificate. So, like you just discussed, there's two different scenarios: married parties, somebody maybe who's married and actually got divorced within a certain period of time, or the parties that have just never been married. And so those, unwed parties is probably the biggest issue and the most people that we see, because again, they don't know, and they don't know what the other partner may have been doing, et cetera. They presume, they've been in a happy relationship for most of the time, that this is probably their child, et cetera, and they move forward with that understanding. But to really establish it, 72 hours within having a child at the hospital, there's a form. It's a paternity affidavit. They would sign it and make sure they're reading it very clearly and closely, because there's certain blocks that can be checked on there that establishes a financial responsibility, a legal responsibility, but it doesn't really give you any parameters as far as, well, what happens when we don't get along and she moves out or I move out. How can I come get the child? Can I not come get the child? And those are where the issues really come into play. But that's one way of establishing a paternity, by saying, yes, I am the father. You've agreed at that point, just on some blind faith, if you will, or, hopefully some good faith that she's been faithful throughout this process. Yeah. The other is by a court order. And a court order can come by the two parties appearing in court, or it could be a default. And that's the cases we don't want to see necessarily from anybody's perspective as a default, because that means they had a hearing and you weren't either informed or you weren't there for some reason. And those, we can talk about those a little more in depth, I think, as we get into the conversation, Scott. But certainly those are really the two ways of establishing paternity.
Yeah. And I think, though, we think about it, many guys come to me and I try to talk to them about they don't really have any legal rights. And I guess it may depend state by state, but until that legal document or from a court perspective is entered, I always suggest, hey, mom could pick up with your child potentially and just move around the country or deny you custody. And the sheriff or, local law is not going to do a thing about it until you actually establish as a matter of law that you're the dad. Is that kind of what you're seeing in Indiana?
Absolutely. Again, although you have signed that document saying I accept these responsibilities for this child. Again, there's no enforcement at that point, because who's going to enforce it? Like you said, police or other enforcement agencies are going to look at it and say, well, this is a civil matter. You have a recourse, and that's going to court for that recourse. So absolutely, even if the parties are getting along, they can still set that up and establish that paternity in court. And again, hey, we live together, so we don't think there's any child support that's needed or anything like that. But at least you have something on the record that shows that they can do that and have some legal rights at that point.
For some dads out there, the coronavirus pandemic has become a pretext to limit access to their children. Other dads have been pushed out of key decisions affecting their children's lives. If you're one of those dads, Cordell Cordell is here for you, as always, but with expanded services. We can meet you in person or by video conference on weekdays, evenings, or weekends. Our goal is to step up our service to meet your needs now.
There's pros and cons with moving forward on a paternity case, because obviously, like you said, maybe you're not paying a lot of child support. Maybe it's a very small amount, but there's some peace of mind over the course. What I see is this relationship is very different than obviously married parties, and they may not be as committed to each other, but yeah, they have a child now that they have an obligation to. And so the downside is now you may be establishing a much higher court-ordered child support than you otherwise are paying. Makes you a little uncomfortable.
There's always a risk
Yep.
associated with it.
but you get guaranteed child or visitation, something in writing that is purely enforceable. And and in some states like Missouri, where mom really has a restriction of relocation without consent or court order, that helps. You start establishing rules regarding choices of school, major health, medical decisions, where the mom has to consult with guys rather than just saying, "Hey, I'm doing this. I don't care what you think," kind of attitude. We see that a lot.
Yeah, the same applies here, Scott. Again, all those things you just kind of talked about. It paves the way, forward for them. Indiana has similar relocation statutes that are required. So if they're moving, they do have to give notice. That it's actually just changed within the last year a little bit, so it's less notice that they have to give. However, they still do have to give it. And so, if they don't have those protections in, there's nothing that prohibits, one of the parties really, and usually it's, the mother in this case, to move to a different state. And then you got a battle over jurisdiction, where the child may have those roots in a home state, as you and I know those terms, et cetera. But, establishing that can become harder and more costly.
Right. Totally. So I guess here's the thing, we talk a lot about establishing it. And many guys come to us and say, yeah, this is my child. I need to help. I need to get some orders. But then there's the question of many guys think, well, I don't know if this is my child. I'm not certain. And they don't know how to go about disproving paternity. Maybe you can walk guys through, watching and listening right now, how they can sort of disprove paternity. What are the different scenarios that you can think of what they should be thinking about doing and their rights and things that they can do to kind of move forward to really kind of figure out what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Scott, we kind of talked about this, from two different aspects. One's the married parties, and then the other is the non-married parties. And so from a married party, it could come up, later on, or even during the divorce, or really any time that says, hey, I've got some questions as to whether this is your child. And so there's some risk associated with that, as well as some, cautionary terms, because if you say, well, maybe this isn't my child, maybe we should have a DNA test. Well, if you've already established a bond and, parental rights, as well as, the habits, if you will, of being a parent, that could really have a large impact on that. And you could lose, any type of rights with the child. And so certainly age may have some aspect and play into what decisions the father decides to take at that point. Because again, if you go move forward and you're able to disprove it, then certainly, what kind of relationship and issues have you just created? And so maybe that's not something that you want to do as they're older. Again, as older children get a mind of their own and understand things, and maybe even one parent talks to the other and says, he may not be this, or this person may not be your dad. Well, again, the curiosity is going to get them, and they may start doing their own research. But, having that relationship ended because you took this stance, could have a very detrimental piece of it. Right. Now, Indiana has some, aspects where you can petition the court for like a step parent parenting time, especially if the father is not known, because you've been a de facto custodian for this child, and that's the terminology that the courts would use, is a de facto custodian. So you've helped care and raise for this child, et cetera. But ultimately, the difference would end up going to, the biological parents if, the other father is known. So there is some caution, that we, exercise in, do you really want to pursue this because of this type of relationship issues? But certainly, it could be done and looked at from that. However, courts, especially if it's post-dissolution and you get this information, it may be a little harder to go back and say, well, wait a minute, yes, the child was born during our marriage, but now I don't believe it's mine. Should I have had to pay all this money in the past? And so they would look at it, is this, untimely filing, basically, and in regards to, coming back now and say, well, wait, I don't think this child's mine. So there's certainly some aspects to look at in regards to when you want to do it, and especially during marriage or dissolution. But if you have some uncertainties, that would be the time, either during the divorce during the marriage, they can go out and get a test on their own for one, just to help ease their minds if they are married or going through that divorce, and catch it during that, because it's a lot easier to overcome and then waiting a few years down the road and finally you find out, no, this isn't mine. I've been supporting them for several years now, because again, the court could say, you know what, you've been doing it. You were married. We presume that the child was yours, so we're going to keep you on the hook there for that. The difference comes again with the unmarried parties. Again, the worst case scenario is they go to court and it's a default. Dad doesn't show up because he never got notice, or just, didn't think it was his anyway, and he's like, they're not going to do anything. And there is an order out there that says now you're financially responsible for this child and legally responsible. So you may not get to make those decisions like you were talking about as far as what school they go to and things like that, because in a default, and I'm going to presume that they will make a sole legal custody award to the party who did show up, but they're still going to put you on the hook for the financial piece. And with that can come tax intercepts, stimulus check intercepts, all kinds of different liens on vehicles, on real property for arrearages and things like that. And so in that regard, you usually have about 2 years, and that's the deadline, if you will, a 2-year statute to go back and say, wait a minute, this isn't my child. And then the court will do a paternity test to determine whether you are or not. So although you may have went out with mom and got a paternity test and determined on your own that the child isn't yours, that may or may not be accepted by the court. So, you can try to present it. Usually if both parties are on the same page, that makes it a little easier in regards to those things.
Yeah. I mean, it's always the danger. And when I counsel guys that come in, whether they're married and then they have questions, or they're not married and they have questions, it's, if they bypass the testing, it's a forever decision. You can't unring the bell. There's a lot of cases about, unless outright fraud. And it's still, even then, it's so difficult to prove. And so it's a very big decision, and it's something we always talked about, the DNA test, and hey, make sure it's a delicate. You've been raising this child for a long time, and emotionally, psychologically, it's just a complicated conversation to have, not only with your attorney, but then with perhaps mom or the child. Why am I getting tested? So, but I do think it's important to have those conversations, know your rights. Paternity is more complicated in some respects because it touches all aspects. And as you suggest, there's all these different perhaps scenarios to disprove it, but it is a kind of a forever decision. Once you're on the hook, you're on the hook,
Yeah, again, and I think there was one case that I actually did look at previously that, they went through a divorce. Again, they presumed that the children were theirs, but then a medical procedure actually came up to where, when the results came back, they were trying to find a match in regards to some blood and bone marrow transplants, et cetera. And they found out that the child wasn't, dad's. And so at that point, the child was like, and dad was kind of concerned about that, but yet he'd established a relationship with the child. So he still wanted a relationship with that child. And so he had to go back and ask for step-parent rights, basically, in regards to it. So he was successful in doing that, but it was a surprise. So, it's not, hey, I don't want to pay child support anymore, so I don't think this is my child. Can we go back and get a DNA test done now? Nothing like that. The courts are most likely just going to dismiss that on the face versus, if you find out through, like you said, a surprise or an unknown circumstance that comes about that proves, hey, this might not be your child, then you may have a better chance after an order's already been put in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's all these, as you point out, kind of statute of limitations, deadlines, things to really pay attention to, whether you're served. We've always talked about that, as you suggest. If you get a pleading, answer it, get an attorney, find out your rights. There's deadlines, in order to contest it, even under fraud circumstances, perhaps. So again, it's just, if there's any questions and you're one of the guys out there with a paternity issue, it's the best 1-hour consultation you're going to have, just to know your rights and be able to enforce your rights if necessary. So,
yeah, and there's one other aspect that I want to touch on. So Indiana actually has a putative father registry. So
Yeah.
again, within the first 2 years of the child being born, they can go in and register, and that prohibits mom from doing certain things, in regards to the child. So if they were ever to file for an adoption or something, although it's legally not been established, if they can go into the system, because they have to, by law, the adoption agencies or whoever's trying to adopt the child has to do that search, and they can see that, hey, I think I'm the dad of this child, then they have a duty to contact that person. So there's another aspect. If you're uncertain, you think it may be, and obviously maybe mom's left, for some reason, and that way it would help protect some of your interest moving forward.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that's great information. I know it's so complicated. We could probably talk for an hour on this topic. So thanks for at least giving guys, a small ounce of kind of the important information that they need to kind of go get an attorney and have that consultation. So appreciate your time today.
No, I appreciate it, Scott. And again, I think as we move forward, based on the quarantine and other things, people are going to find themselves in this situation more, and to know that somebody here is to advocate for them and point them in the right direction and help them get the legal aspect of it taken care of is very important.
Absolutely. Well, continue to tune in to our virtual town hall as we continue to bring topics like this. We'll be joined this week in our town hall talking about changes and modifications and things that happen both with you, your spouse, or maybe perhaps mom. They're going to be important information, and we'll even touch a little bit on paternity as it relates to that and taking action during COVID-19. So continue to stay with us. And if you have questions, you certainly, again, can reach out to us and you can have a consultation as we suggested today at 866-DADS-LAW or on the web at CordellCordell.com. Until next time, have a great week.